Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Dave was in the company's conference room when the CEO entered, smiling with satisfaction. All eyes turned to him as the boss announced warmly, "Congratulations, Dave. You are the new Chief Financial Officer." His colleagues applauded, and he felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. After all, this promotion was the result of years of hard work, sleepless nights, countless moments when he had to put work above everything else. Still, as he celebrated, inside, a bit of anxiety began to stir in his chest. Being promoted was an achievement, but he knew that great responsibilities awaited him when he got home. Dave could barely contain his excitement. "Emily, you won't believe this," he exclaimed as he came through the door. She met him with an enthusiastic smile, hugging him. "Tell me what happened." He took a deep breath, savoring the moment before answering. "I got promoted. I'm the CFO." Her face lit up, and she hugged him. "Tighter, you deserve this, my love. I'm so proud of you." The joy of that moment was cut short when Dave mentioned casually, "But there's one thing, I need to travel this weekend for a meeting. It's an important commitment." Emily's smile faltered. "This weekend, Dave, you know it's Liza's wedding. I'm a bridesmaid. We've been planning this for months." Her tone wasn't anger, it was disappointed, which Dave feared even more. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "I know, Emily, and I'm sorry, but this is my first responsibility as CFO. I can't miss it." The room seemed to shrink. Emily crossed her arms, taking a deep breath. "Dave, this is important to me. I've supported you every step of your career, but you can't expect me to just accept this as if it means nothing." He tried to reason with her. "Honey, it's not that I want to miss it. You know how much I value being by your side. But this is my job. I promise I'll make it up to you. We'll take some time just for our afterward." Despite his attempt to smooth things over, the tension between them was palpable. Emily didn't want to seem selfish, but she felt neglected at a moment that for her symbolized the union of a couple. Dave, on the other hand, felt trapped between professional duty and please his wife. They remained silent for a moment, each lost in thought. Later, as Dave packed his bags, he overheard Emily talking on the phone with a friend, venting about the situation. He knew he had hurt his wife, but he believed he was doing what was necessary for their future. The weight of that decision would stay with him as he boarded his flight, unable to imagine what awaited him upon his return as the plane took off. Dave leaned back in his seat, trying to put his thoughts in order. The scene with Emily still echoed in his mind, and he wondered if he had made the right decision. He justified it to himself, thinking that as CFO, he had to meet expectations, but he couldn't ignore the look of disappointment on his wife's face. Meanwhile, Robert realized that he had responsibilities to meet with his beneficiaries. The pressure of his new position seemed to blend with the discomfort of leaving a conflict unresolved. Upon arriving at the company's hotel, Dave received a message from the meeting's organizer. "Urgent. The meeting has been postponed. New date to be confirmed." He stared at the phone screen, feeling a mix of relief and irritation. Relief because at least now he had more time to organize his thoughts. Irritation because he realized this trip, which had caused so much conflict, might not have been necessary at all. A sudden impulse hit him. He could go back and be with Emily after all. The wedding was still happening, and maybe, just maybe, his presence could help fix what had been broken. Without thinking twice, he traded his hotel reservation for the first flight back. On the way to the airport, he felt a different kind of excitement. There was something almost romantic about showing up unexpectedly, making up for his absence with a spontaneous gesture. He could picture Emily's face when she saw him there, appearing in the middle of the celebration, showing that she mattered. It was the kind of move he didn't usually make, but now it seemed essential during the flight home. Dave thought about how work, as fulfilling as it was, and ended up taking too much space in his life. He didn't want it to cost him his marriage. He remembered when they first started dating, when he had nothing but dreams, promises. Emily had always been by his side, and now he needed to return that support when he landed. Dave didn't waste any time. He took a taxi straight to the wedding venue, checking the address Emily had mentioned on his phone. His excitement grew as he got closer, imagining every step of what would happen next. He would slip in quietly, find Emily, and she would be happy to see what he was doing for her. Maybe this wouldn't erase his mistakes, but it would be a gesture, showing his commitment deep down. A sort of fresh start after a misunderstanding. As he reached the location, the music and the festive voices coming from the entrance made him smile. He was about to walk in, feeling lighter than he had had in a long time, with no idea that in just a few minutes, that smile would be completely wiped away. Dave entered the ballroom, quietly trying not to draw attention. He looked around for Emily among the guests, imagining the moment their eyes would meet. A mix of nervousness and hope filled his mind. He passed decorated tables, guests laughing and talking, glasses clinking. It was a vibrant atmosphere, but his attention was fixed on one girl. Finding his wife, suddenly he saw her on the dance floor. Emily looked beautiful, just as always, wearing the dress he had seen in the closet days before. For a moment, he stopped admiring her from a distance, feeling a slight twinge of pride. But within seconds, what seemed like a comforting scene began to turn into something unsettling. Emily wasn't alone. She was dancing with a man who looked familiar. Dave narrowed his eyes, trying to recognize him, until the shock hit him like a wave. It was Michael, Emily's ex-husband. His body tensed, and a bitter feeling washed over him. He tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just a casual dance, something harmless. But as he watched, the intimacy between them was undeniable. They were too close, laughing, exchanging looks. Dave, and knew all too well, he felt his heart tighten, but he still didn't want to believe the worst. Dave decided to watch from a distance, a bit longer, trying to understand the situation before reacting. He positioned himself in a darker corner, pretending to check his phone, but his eyes stayed on the dance floor. That's when the moment he feared most happened. Michael placed his hands on Emily's waist in a way that left no doubts about his intentions, and she didn't pull away. In fact, she smiled at a way that made Dave feel like a stranger witnessing something he shouldn't. He thought about walking over and confronting them right there, but he couldn't move. It was as if his feet were stuck to the floor, unable to react. The situation reached its peak when Michael, without hesitation, leaned in and kissed Emily. She didn't back away. To Dave, something spilled over and kissed him in the mouth. The world around him faded. There was nothing left but that blatant betrayal unfolding right before his eyes. Dave felt a lump in his throat, followed by a wave of anger mixed with sadness. Seeing Emily in another man's arms, not just any man, but someone from her past, was a blow he never imagined having to face. With trembling hands, he took his phone and almost instinctively snapped a photo of the moment. He didn't know why he did it, maybe to have proof, maybe just to process what he was seeing. All he knew was that something inside him had changed forever. Without saying a word, he turned and started walking toward the exit. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if he were leaving behind not only that place, but also the memories, the promises, and the years he had spent with Emily. The reality he had feared was now out in the open. The marriage he had fought to protect was over, and there was no going back. Dave walked to the car as though carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, pain, humiliation, and a sadness that seemed to consume him. He still held his phone in his hand, looking at the photo. He had just started to place it in his pocket, and when he looked at it, he wanted to cry from joy. He had met and fallen in love with someone he had believed to be solid built over decades. Sitting in the driver's seat, he stared at the steering wheel for a moment, trying to pull himself together. His heart was racing, and his breathing was heavy without much thought. He opened the messaging app to Emily's chat. The words came quickly, almost on their own. "I'm leaving. Our marriage is over," before hitting send. He attached the photo he had taken. It was direct, cold, leaving no room for interpretation. He knew it would hit Emily hard. At that moment, he didn't care. The sound of the message being sent echoed in the car like a final period in a story. He never expected to end this way. As he drove away from the wedding, his phone started vibrating nonstop. Emily was calling, but Dave didn't have the strength to answer. He knew what she would say. Apologies, explanations, maybe even denials, but none of it mattered anymore. The image of that kiss was etched in his mind like an open wound, and nothing she said would erase what he'd seen. He turned off the phone, tossing it onto the seat beside him as if wanting to distance himself, not only from her voice, but from everything she represented. Dave drove for hours without a specific destination. Each mile felt like an attempt to get away from the pain, but at the same time he knew he couldn't escape his feelings. Eventually he stopped at a small roadside motel. It was a simple place, far from the luxury he was used to, but at that moment he didn't need comfort, he needed solitude. He threw himself onto the bed, staring at the ceiling while scenes from the wedding kept playing in his head like a cruel movie. The next day, without talking to anyone, he rented a small apartment in a discreet part of the city. The place was temporary, but it seemed perfect for his need to start over. With heavy, tired eyes, he sat in front of the computer and began filling out the divorce papers. Each word he wrote on the form cut deeper, but also brought a sense of closure. He was determined there was no room for reconciliation or second chances. Emily had crossed a line he couldn't ignore. The first few weeks were an emotional test for Dave. He avoided social media, ignored Emily's calls, and stayed focused on work to occupy his mind. Still, at night, solitude was inevitable. He caught himself remembering the good times, the trips they took, the birthdays they celebrated, and even the small fights that now seemed trivial, but reality always came back with force. She had cheated on him. Not only that, but with someone from her past, someone he had assumed was buried in history. Dave knew that to move forward, he had to leave the past behind, but at that moment, all he could do was feel the emptiness of a life he no longer recognized as his own. Weeks turned into months, and Dave began to rediscover a routine without Emily. The temporary apartment, once empty and impersonal, slowly gained personality. A bookshelf with books he'd always wanted to read but never had time for now filled a corner of the living room. A coffee maker he'd bought on a whim. Nowadays, the smell of his wine, Cynthia, was coercive, stifling his smile. Became his companion during quiet mornings. Though the pain still lingered, Dave realized that living alone wasn't as frightening as he'd imagined. At work, he was more efficient than ever. His concentration on projects grew, maybe because his personal pain forced him to channel his energy into something productive. His colleagues noticed the change. Dave is more focused than ever, they said. Few knew what was happening outside the office. He kept his personal life private, thinking it was easier that way. One evening, while aimlessly browsing social media, Dave had an impulse. Idea. He created a new anonymous profile and began posting short reflections on overcoming hardship. Short phrases, sincere thoughts, like a public diary. To his surprise, these posts started gaining attention. "Keep walking even when the ground seems to disappear," he wrote once, and the message received hundreds of likes and comments. People shared their own stories, and suddenly Dave realized his words were helping others. This virtual space became a sort of therapy for him. Sharing his journey not only eased the weight in his own heart, but also connected him with people who understood what he was going through. He started responding to messages, offering advice based on his experience. It takes courage to leave something you loved, but that no longer does you any good, he would say. With each interaction, he felt stronger. It was in this context that Lauren appeared in his life. She was a regular follower of his posts, but her approach was different. Instead of just commenting, she sent him a private message. "Your last post touched me deeply. Can I ask how you managed to take the first step to move on?" Dave, used to messages like this, replied without much expectation. But the conversation with Lauren took an unexpected turn. She was direct, intelligent, and there was something about the way she spoke that made him want to keep talking. They started chatting regularly, first about the themes in Dave's posts, then about their personal lives. Lauren had her own story of overcoming adversity. She had left a toxic relationship years ago and now worked as a therapist, helping others heal from trauma. Dave felt that, for the first time in months, he was connecting with someone who understood his pain without judging him. They met for the first time at a quiet cafe downtown. Lauren was exactly as he imagined, warm, confident, but with a certain lightness that made Dave feel at ease. The conversation flowed naturally, and by the end of the meeting, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. It wasn't just about starting over with someone else. It was about believing again that life had room for happiness, even after such a painful ending. Lauren didn't come into his life to fill a void. She was a partner walking alongside him that made all the difference. Slowly, Dave began writing a new chapter in his life, without rushing, but with a clarity he never had before. There were still scars, of course, but they served as reminders of his resilience, and for the first time he allowed himself to imagine a future not defined by the past. Dave was starting to feel that his life was finally moving forward, on a new path, with Lauren by his side when an unexpected message appeared on his phone. It was from Emily, after months of silence. She wanted to reestablish. "Contact Dave. Can we talk? I feel like we left some things unresolved." He stared at the message for a few minutes, torn between the anger he still felt and the curiosity about what she had to say. Despite the temptation to ignore her completely, he decided he needed to hear her out. Not for her, but for himself. They arranged to meet at a restaurant they used to go to in the past. When Emily arrived, Dave noticed something different about her. She looked tired, almost worn out, as if the last few months had been more of a burden than she expected. Still, he remained firm. She apologized almost immediately, her words rushing out. "Dave, I know I was wrong. I don't know what I was thinking that night. It was a mistake, and I've regretted it every day since." Dave listened in silence, his expression neutral. He knew Emily was waiting for a response, but he wasn't ready to give her what she wanted. You're saying it was just a mistake? that kissing your ex husband just happened. His voice was controlled but carried a sharp edge. Emily tried to justify herself.